The topic that I'm going to discuss is enzyme inhibition, regulation and allosteric regulation. There are some part of regulation even, out of which one part is allosteric regulation. Now please settle down. Why this topic is important? Because while you are going for the topics of metabolism, in earlier days, metabolism in biochemistry used to have a big role in as per as the examination. Okay, but nowadays, from the moment that CBME got launched and all, they have taken regulation more seriously. And actually, if you see the application of biochemistry in terms of in terms of metabolism or in terms of any application of that in pharmaceutical companies and all sort of thing, they more look towards the regulation. And understanding the regulation is very difficult. It's very difficult. That how an enzyme gets regulated, provided by the regulators. The most difficult part in this is how to remember that which is going to be the regulator, what are the components that are going to be the regulator. Very tough. So at last what you people will do? We'll start mugging it off. Just previous day of examination, next day's examination, we'll go and vomit it out. Which is not possible. Okay? So today what we are going to discuss will be primarily focusing that how to understand and how to go through the allosteric regulators and how to remember. There is no need of mugging it off. You can just see the reaction, you can just understand the reaction and you can write it by your own. It will be 90%, it will be 95%, it will be correct. You will be correct. Okay, I'll give you some tricks how to understand and all. Are we ready? Fine. So first of all, we'll stop inhibition. What is inhibition? What is inhibition in general? If any component, it's a process where a component acts on certain thing and makes certain changes or doesn't allow the reaction to get performed. Or you can say the entire process is halted, is slower down. That is what called as inhibition. Fine? Yes or no? Agreed? Inhibition is provided by a sort of components that are called as inhibitors. Simple? Fine? So when we talk about enzyme inhibition, there are two types of enzyme inhibitions that we are going to encounter. One is reversible, another is irreversible. Have you heard about these terms, terminologies? What is reversible? When we call any inhibition as reversible inhibition? Just generalized way. I'm just asking a general question. When we can call any inhibition as reversible inhibition? Okay, fine. Another question. When we can call an inhibition provided to the binding of inhibitor to the enzyme or the protein, when we can call it as a reversible? I gave you a hint. We call any inhibition as reversible or irreversible is dependent on how strongly or how weakly the inhibitor is going to bind to the enzyme or the protein complex. Is my point clear? Is my point clear? So these two terms are going to be defined provided by the binding nature of inhibitor provided to the enzyme complex. Okay? If the inhibitor binds strongly provided by covalent forces, the binding is going to be strong or weak? Strong. Fine? If the force that is providing the binding or that is allowing the binding of the inhibitor provided to the enzyme or the complex, if it is strong, it is impossible to remove the inhibitor out. So in that state, if for once a time, if the inhibitor is going to bind to the enzyme for the entire life of that enzyme, it is going to get inhibited. It is not possible to remove the inhibitor out of the enzyme. Is that clear? If it is reversible, what we say? The force that is going to allow the binding of inhibitor to the enzyme should be weak. That can be non-covalent forces. You got my point? You got my point? So we divide inhibition into two parts, reversible or irreversible, and both are dependent on the binding properties or the binding forces they are using. Okay, if it is a tight bond, if it is a strong bond, if it allows or happens to be as covalent forces, irreversible. If weak forces, non-covalent forces, reversible. Is that clear? When we say reversible, whenever we say reversible, there is a condition comes. That if I am saying that the binding of inhibitor to the enzyme is reversible, there is a condition. The condition is, as the inhibitor is going to bind to the enzyme with a weaker bonds, so if you increase the substrate concentration, the chances of inhibitor getting bind to the enzyme reduces. You got my point? Is my point clear? Yes or no? All of you? If you are going to increase the substrate concentration, the chances of the inhibitor binding to the enzyme complex reduces. Okay? Is that clear? But there will be an exception. We'll come to that later. Remember this point. Okay? If you talk about reversible inhibition, again they are of two types. Competitive and non-competitive. Have you heard about these terms? Have you heard, all of you? For whom this is going to be a new, for whom it is going to be a new term, competitive, non-competitive. You haven't heard? Okay, no issue. All of you have heard. Shall we start with competitive first? Chalo. Why we call it as competitive then? You all have studied, na? Semi. Why we are calling competitive? There has to be some competition. Okay. When we talk about competition, when we talk about competition, when we have a set goal, yes or no? You all have a set goal that you are supposed to clear the first professional examination, first MBBS professional exam. That is your goal. That's why you all are competing. Is it clear? All of you wants to stand out of the range. You want to stop or you want to take the gold medal or whatever, XYZ. So you are competing for a goal. And this competition is healthy competition or non-healthy, unhealthy competition? Healthy competition. Why this is healthy competition? Because you all are of same age group. All of you have got same brain capacity because you are of same age group. You all have same physical states differentiated into different two sexes. Another thing, any other thing. So everything you are going to get, you all are in a same phase, you all are of same age group, everything is similar. That's why the competition is healthy. Fine. That's why you people are competing. Now, when we talk about competitive inhibition, imagine if I have to go for a 100-meter race and my opponent partner is my competitor is Usain Bolt. Is that a healthy competition? It's not going to be healthy. Definitely वो मेरे से पता नहीं कहाँ निकल जाएगा पता नहीं भगवान जाने. I don't know. It is not possible. It is not at all a healthy competition. Now, scenario number 2. If I was given a time of 1 year to practice hard, to make my physique like him, XYZ, diet change, everything. After 1 year, the same competition starts. Me in a different way and Usain Bolt. Is the competition healthy now? It can be. Still, imagine karo. Okay. Still, it is not a healthy competition, but just imagine. So, for competition, what you need is a healthier environment, a structural analog, a structural similarity. Lot of things, lot of similarity should be there. Then only that competition is a healthy competition. Okay. In this case of competitive inhibition, the inhibitor and the substrate is moving towards a goal. And the goal is nothing but active site. Fine. That means inhibitor and the substrate both are going to bind to the active site. Yes or no? Okay. Fine. But we know that active site is specific to the substrate. We know now. Active sites of an enzyme is specific to the substrate. So this active site has to be specific for the substrate as well as for the inhibitor also. So in this ratio, we say that the structure of inhibitor and the structure of substrate should be same. Is my statement correct? Is my statement correct? Say yes or no. Yes, sir. My statement is not correct. Say why? Similar in what? Identical. वही तो same बात हुई ना. Identical, similar, structural, resemblance. These all are like same. But why my statement is incorrect? Have you gone through induced fit model, Coastland's theory? What does it state? The substrate is not similar to the active site, is not identical to the active site, but the structure of substrate is identical to the transition state of an enzyme. What does induced model theory says? This is what induced model theory says, that when a substrate binds to an enzyme active site, it causes some conformational changes in the enzyme active site that makes the substrate more easily or more compatible to the active site of the enzyme. That makes the substrate bind more tightly to the enzyme active site. Yes or no? Yes or no? So this is where the statement that I made is incorrect, because when inhibitor, if I am saying that inhibitor and substrate are structurally analog, not to the active site but to the transition state of the enzyme substrate reaction, or the ES complex or EI complex. Yes or no? Got my point? Is that clear? Chalo. So as I said, there is going to be a structural similarity. If there is structural similarity, then there will be a competition between the substrate and the inhibitor to bind to the active site. Fine. So what do you think is going to happen with the Km? अभी भी लिखा हुआ था, थोड़ी देर पहले मैंने I just rubbed it. My question is, if the inhibitor and the substrate, both of them are going to fight together, fight for one goal, that is active site, they are running towards the active site. You let me know that how or what or how is going to it, whether it is going to affect the Km or not. Km is what? Michel's constant. I told you, and that is irreversibly proportional to affinity. Affinity of what for whom? Affinity of enzyme for the. Let me know. You have three options. Km is going to decrease, Km is going to increase, Km is going to remain unchanged. It will decrease. Very confident, but you are wrong. दो ऑप्शन बचा, उसमें तो कोई एक तो हो गई. You have to justify if you are saying decrease. It justify it why? Okay. There is competition between the substrate and the inhibitor for the same active site. Okay. So why Km will decrease? Increase. Yeah. Anything else? Thoda, you are supposed to come to the scenario of affinity a little bit. If Km is increasing, then how the affinity of the enzyme remains unchanged? Okay. That was my answer. I am asking little more explanation from your side. You can think. I told you the answer is Km is going to increase. Okay. That states that the affinity of the enzyme for the substrate is going to decrease. How you explain this? How you justify this point? Affinity is going to decrease in the presence of inhibitor. Arey, simple statement, justify, simple. In the presence of inhibitor, the enzyme needs more substrate to reach half Vmax. Simple. You got my point? Earlier, scenario 1, okay, there was no inhibitor, only substrate, active enzyme, and the reaction proceeds. The Km was XYZ. Now, scenario number 2, you have enzyme, active enzyme, you have substrate, and you have inhibitor. Now, because it is a competitive inhibition, the substrate and inhibitor is going to compete for the active site. As a result for that, to reach 50% saturation, the enzyme, if it needs to reach 50% saturation with the substrate, it needs more substrate concentration. You getting my point? Because there is already an inhibitor fighting for the active site. Competition हो रहा है, दौड़ रहे हैं दोनों एक ही जगह के लिए. So in this state of time, the enzyme needs more substrate. Km, the definition of Km is what? Substrate concentration at which the velocity of the reaction is at half Vmax. What is half Vmax? 50% of enzyme is saturated with the substrate. Clear? Is that clear? The graph states, this is the graph without inhibitor. This is with the substrate. Where you see, this is the half Vmax. Okay? And this is the K. Without inhibitor. Now when you add inhibitor, see, the Vmax remains same, no change, but the Km increases, yes or no? Km in presence of inhibitor increases, whereas the Km in the presence of substrate remains this much. Is that clear? Is that clear? You should be very justificable. Whenever any query comes out, now ask yourself these questions. That why Km is now increasing? Try to justify yourself. Okay. Next question. Why half Vmax remains unchanged? Forget about Vmax. Forget about this line. Because this is blackboard, I cannot draw that perfectly, you know. Think about half Vmax. The half Vmax in the presence of substrate, the half Vmax in the presence of inhibitor remains same, unchanged. The velocity of the reaction remains unchanged. Why? How you explain this example, you know? Take 100 enzymes, 100 substrates. They will form 100 ES, yes or no? ES stands for enzyme substrate complex. Will they form? Now, take 100 enzymes, take 50 substrates, and take 50 inhibitors. What do you think? How many products you are going to get, or enzyme substrate complex you are supposed to get? 50? 50? Yes or no? Sorry, एक गलती है यहाँ पे. Sorry, it should be 100. Sorry. So the chances of formation of enzyme substrate complex becomes 50. Because it is expected that 50% of the enzyme substrate complex are going to get formed and 50% will be enzyme inhibitor complex. So 50% saturation will be there, half saturation. Is the time that is going to take, is it going to differ? No. Because if a substrate binds competitively to the enzyme, it will form the product in the same amount of time. There is no change in the enzyme activity. But if 50 enzymes are taken away by the inhibitor, or the site is occupied by the inhibitor, that enzyme is blocked. Is that clear? So for 50 enzymes to get saturated, half of the enzyme to get saturated, it takes approx the same velocity, approx the same time to reach half Vmax. Yes or no? Yes or no? This is the reason why Vmax, half Vmax, doesn't change, or it remains unchanged. Okay? But if you have to say that sir, Km has increased in presence of A and Vmax remains unchanged. If you are stating this, you have to justify. Okay? If you talk about the examples of competitive inhibition, very commonly used. I feel many of your parents or grandparents must be using, or any family members must be using. Statin drugs. They are named as statins. Statins. They are basically cholesterol lowering drugs. Okay. These statins, they come under the different brand names like atorvastatin, pravastatin, lovastatin, many other there. If you talk about statins, basically they are competitive inhibitor, right? That means they are supposed to be a structural analog of something. What the enzyme that they are going to inhibit is called as HMG-CoA reductase. This is the enzyme that is going to get inhibited by statins. This enzyme is the rate limiting step of cholesterol biosynthesis, and this enzyme is present in smooth endoplasmic reticulum. Okay? Statins competes with HMG-CoA. HMG-CoA is the substrate and statin is the inhibitor for this enzyme. Okay? If HMG-CoA gets attached to the active site of HMG-CoA reductase, it forms mevalonate. That goes for cholesterol biosynthesis. There is an entire process. But if statin binds to HMG-CoA, it inhibits this enzyme. As a result, no cholesterol is formed. That's why it is called as cholesterol lowering drug. Is that clear? Clear? Remember this, okay? Now, moving to non-competitive inhibition. See, if it is non-competitive inhibition, what do you think? Is there going to be any competition? Of course not. The name suggests, isn't it? If there is not going to be any competition, do we need the inhibitor and the substrate to be a structural similar? Do we need that? No. Do we need that? No. Do we need, is it compulsory that the inhibitor should always bind to the active site? No, not needed. Then it can bind somewhere else. Maybe, yes, of course. If the enzyme has got some other sites. Fine. So first of all, for non-competitive inhibitors, we don't have structural similarity. Okay? They are not structural analogs of the substrate. Point number one. Second point, if not structural analog, then they are not going to get adapted or accepted to the active site of that enzyme. Is that clear? So they are going to bind where? They will bind to some other sites. Point number three. Just we saw that when we talked about competitive inhibitor, the inhibitor binds to active site. Is there any other site it binded to? No. It binded to the active site. So the site where the substrate as well as the inhibitor is going to bind is same for competitive inhibitor. But here the site is different. Fine. In competitive inhibitor, if an enzyme or the site, active site of the enzyme is occupied by the substrate, will the inhibitor bind? Will the inhibitor bind? No. Okay? In non-competitive competitive inhibition, the inhibitor can bind to the free enzyme or enzyme substrate complex as well. Because the inhibitor is not going to bind to the active site. It is still there. So the inhibitor is going to bind to an unknown site or another site apart from the active site. That's why even if it is unchanged, why you are saying unchanged? Why you are saying it unchanged? Anyone, just raise your hand and say. Be fast. Why you are going to say it as it is going to remain unchanged? Why? See, there is no competition, there is no similarity between the substrate and the inhibitor. So the inhibitor is going to bind independently to the another side, not the active side. As a result of that, the availability or the affinity of the enzyme for the substrate remains same. No change. Okay. What do you think is going to happen with the Vmax? There are two lines. Which one should be for substrate? Which one should be for inhibitor? Semi. There are two graphs. 1, 2. As you told, the Km remains unchanged. Fine, I accept. Out of these two, which one should be for inhibitor? Which one should be for substrate? Substrate should be below 1. Agree? Agreed or not? No, before you say anything, you should think. You should think about it. In case of non-competitive inhibitor, I am again saying it is binding to another site, not the active site. Fine. Let it be a free enzyme, let it be a enzyme substrate complex. So even if the enzyme substrate complex is there, if an inhibitor binds, it will totally block the enzyme activity. It will totally disrupt the reaction. Yes or no? Yes or no? In this scenario, the velocity of the rate of the reaction is going to remain same, is going to remain unchanged, or is going to decrease or is going to increase. The reaction is stopped. The reaction is stopped totally. So the rate of reaction should decrease or increase? Decrease. Half Vmax, nothing but velocity of the reaction. एक ट्रेन है, उसमें 1000 लोग, एक बस है, उसमें 1000 लोग बैठे हुए, 10 लोग बैठे हुए, उसमें तुमने जबरदस्ती 100 और भर दिया. You added 100 more. Speed of the bus will? Simple. Okay. So which one should be for inhibitor then? This is for substrate. This is for inhibitor. You can see that there is a decrease in Vmax, half Vmax. This is what the change in velocity of the reaction provided in the presence of an inhibitor. Okay, is that clear? Can you differentiate easily? Okay, if we talk about the examples of non-competitive inhibitors, very simple, all poisons, toxins are non-competitive inhibitor. All poisons, toxins are non-competitive inhibitor. A very commonly used in clinical practice, in diagnostic laboratories, specifically in biochemistry, that is, we use violet color, grey colored vacuum in which we collect the blood sample that we need to process for fasting blood glucose or random blood glucose or postprandial blood glucose. Okay? That color of that vacuum is grey color. Why that is grey color? You know why specifically the blood collected into it is provided for only glucose estimation? Because it contains an inhibitor that is called as fluoride. That is called as fluoride, grey cap. Okay, fluoride is a non-competitive inhibitor of a very specific enzyme of glycolysis called as enolase. The enzyme name is enolase. Now, enolase is an enzyme that requires magnesium ions. So what fluoride ions does, it chelates the magnesium out of the environment. So the magnesium cannot participate as a cofactor in that reaction. As a result, the glycolysis is inhibited. Okay, is that clear? So fluoride is one of the example of non-competitive inhibitors. These non-competitive inhibitors, as I told you, all toxins, most of the toxins and poisons are non-competitive inhibitor. Apart from that, some metal ions are also inhibitor or like non-competitive inhibitor. Is that clear? If you want to write some names, do you want some examples? Please write down. Non-competitive inhibitor, cyanide. Cyanide. Cyanide is one of the non-competitive inhibitor that inhibits cytochrome oxidase. Fluoride I have already told you. One more can be iodoacetate that inhibits sulfhydryl groups of many proteins. Iodoacetate that blocks or inhibits the sulfhydryl group of many proteins or enzymes. Okay. Next two comes as uncompetitive inhibition and suicidal inhibition. Uncompetitive, suicide. Uncompetitive, what does it mean? No competition. How no competition? How you differentiate and remember? See, non-competitive, what was the statement? I have written over here. Acha, it is there. They bind to some other site. Either it can be a free enzyme or either it can be an enzyme substrate complex. That is non-competitive. Is that clear? Uncompetitive, it will only bind to enzyme substrate complex. Is that clear? It will only bind to enzyme substrate complex. So where it is going to bind? It is going to bind to some other sites apart from the active site. Yes or no? Fine. If we talk about the changes, both Vmax and Km decreases. Can you justify? Because I am also in the campus, you people are also in the campus, I may ask you this question anytime. You have to justify, not now. I give you time. Is that clear? You got it? For uncompetitive inhibition, Vmax and Km both decreases. Your answer should be ready with the proper justification. Yes or no? Ready? Chalo. This is a task for you. Example, if you want to note about uncompetitive inhibition, a very specific example, that is of alkaline phosphatase, placental alkaline phosphatase. It is an isoenzyme of ALP, that is alkaline phosphatase, that is specifically found in placenta. That is also called as Regan's isoenzyme. This name is going to come a lot of time. Regan's isoenzyme. Okay. This isoenzyme or alkaline phosphatase is inhibited by phenylalanine provided by uncompetitive inhibition. Okay. So the inhibitor, uncompetitive inhibitor for alkaline phosphatase, placental alkaline phosphatase is phenylalanine. Yeah. Phenylalanine. It's an amino acid. Aromatic amino acid. Okay. Very classical example. You will come to know about this enzyme. Okay. Next is suicide inhibition. Why? What is suicide? Self-harm, self-death, self-destruction. Suicide. Yes or no? If you think about why the name has been provided as suicidal inhibition, you will come to know what the story is. What do you expect? There is an inhibitor, there is an enzyme. Now you think. Please. There is an enzyme, there is an inhibitor. You think about the story. If you, अगर कभी भी ऐसा लगता है, if you think any time, like if you are going to answer wrongly, I am going to scold you. I never scold. I appreciate. I never scold. Neither I will. I will scold you people for your mischievous acts or anything. But I will never scold inside this classroom. No. Please. बोलिए और एक बार बोलो. उसके रिएक्शन को इनएक्टिवेट करके what she wants to say is कि the enzyme or the inhibitor attaches to the enzyme to inactivate the enzyme. That is a general inhibition. That is general inhibition. Then what is the difference between suicidal inhibition and other part of inhibition? Who binds to a substrate? No, substrate, how can they have binding site? Substrate? How can they have? When the inhibitor binds to the enzyme, it gets inhibited. वही हुआ, destroyed मतलब inhibited. Now the story is, see, if you are saying this, like what he said, she said, there has to be some difference, no? That's why it is classified as a different group. If I say in general story, as an inhibitor is there, enzyme is there, inhibitor will bind to the enzyme will get destroyed or will stop working. General inhibition. Okay, there has to be some difference. The difference lies in the inhibitor that you are using is less potent, inhibitor. सुन लो, बाद में लिखना. Listen to me first. The inhibitor that is going to act as a suicidal inhibitor or suicide inhibitor is a less potent inhibitor. Okay, point number 1. This inhibitor is going to bind to the enzyme, okay, and will produce a product, and will produce some product. The reaction will continue. The enzyme will not get blocked yet. Why? Because the inhibitor is less potent. Okay? It will carry on the reaction and it will give a product. This product is going to be the potent inhibitor of this enzyme. अब सोचो ये सुसाइड क्यों बोला गया? अब सोच के देखो इसे सुसाइडल क्यों बोला गया? ये अपने ही एंजाइम मशीनरी को यूज करके it produces a protein, it produces any product, let not be protein, it produces a product that is going to be more dangerous for himself. Got my point? Is that clear? Is that clear to you? So that is why it is called as suicidal inhibition. The enzyme is suiciding. Enzyme knows that if I am going to allow this inhibitor to bind to me, I am going to produce a product that is going to be more potent or more dangerous for me. That is going to allow me to go to death. Suicide. Okay. Most common example and most confusing example. In many books you will see many statements. That example is of allopurinol. Allopurinol. Have you heard about this drug? This drug is used for the treatment of gout. Gouty arthritis. Gout. So, you know, swelling is there because of deposition of urate crystals and all. It's very painful. Okay? Allopurinol is not the higher potent inhibitor. It is a less potent inhibitor. Okay? It binds to the enzyme xanthine oxidase. What it called? Xanthine oxidase. Non-competitively. क्या बोला? Non-competitively. ठीक है? And it produces a product called as alloxanthine. What it is called? Alloxanthine. This alloxanthine blocks xanthine oxidase more potently. That's why it is called as suicidal inhibition. In some books, this example is given in non-competitive inhibition. But if you go to standard books, they have clearly mentioned that it is a classical example of suicidal inhibition. That's why we call it as a non-competitive suicidal inhibition. Clear? Is that clear? Please remember this. They generally ask you to write about suicidal inhibition in a short note or 2 marks question kind of thing. If you need to give an example, please give this. Because for non-competitive inhibitors, you have a lot of other examples. Okay?